Welcome back to episode 34 of The Bench. I was banished to a hotel last time. Now I'm back in my apartment, and Squishy is back from the Toronto Warcraft Connect. How was that?
Dude, that was great. There were a couple bench viewers that saw me there and congratulated and thanked our podcast. So Growl, they missed you. So
Much
shout out
love.
to
That's
them.
awesome. When you told me that
Um,
earlier, I'm just like, dang, that owns.
but yeah, that was awesome. We Holly Longdale was there. Tina Wang was there. So we got a nice meet and greet, and then was a nice statement.
Okay,
And
so
meeting with lots of people.
they announced that BlizzCon was happening in September of 2026. I was
Yeah.
considering going to the Boston one at PAX in lieu of like a BlizzCon this year. Was it worth going to? Like, should I go to the?
I think you should go. If I think I think they said they were gonna have different people at each one. So Ian or Morgan might be there, and you could talk with them. But it's just more of a mixer than anything else. So if you want a mixer, then
Oh, it's a social outing. Oh,
it's a social outing more than anything else. Tettles not for the mixers.
No.
Yeah, everyone in the comments is just like, social outing.
dude, a
eh.
social outing for work.
I'll pass. I'm busy that day. I'm kind
Dude.
of feeling a little sick.
Everybody knows like those meetings that like the social mixers that you have for like your job, and you're like, God, you're like, I'm sitting here, I'm just like, should I go? Like, man, it's a good opportunity. Maybe I should.
It's a
Yeah,
good
I mean, it's a little different when it's for Warcraft than your job, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
kind of even for us, but like, no, it's very different.
Yeah.
How have you been, Growl? Yeah, what's your IO looking like?
Honestly, I haven't really been doing push keys. I've been doing like I don't know about everyone else. It feels like everyone else is having the same problem, but you just can't get the rings in the neck you need to drop.
Oh,
They're
my
like
God.
omega super rare, so I've been spending like my spare time just pugging like mother loads and whatever. So I just finally got like maybe 2 days ago, I got my disc priest like everything from Mythic Plus. Like now it's time to raid or whatever. And then Dorky shows up in my chat. He's like, "So when you gear in a Mistweaver or Druid?" And then I'm like, "Oh no!" So I already know what that means. My Disc Priest is done for the season. So I spent the last 2 days doing alt keys and catching my my other guys back up. So yeah, I've just been like doing alt stuff, farming up guys. I mean, I was still kind of sick, as people remember, on the first week, so I didn't really play my alts too much. But now I'm starting to get up to speed on like all the healers and kind of get a feel for everything and keys and all that. But I've been having a good time. I don't know, dungeons are fun. Looking forward to seeing what the keys are like when they start to get high, but I haven't quite got there yet.
Why are people off disc?
Because I think disc has a ceiling of how much it can heal, and people are worried that like it's not going to be able to make some heal checks. And I think Mistweaver's damage is like really, really high. They like giga buffed a lot of things, and they have a ton of talent synergy. Especially single target, Mistweaver's doing huge damage. So I think that's like either it's very likely that either you don't need to do high healing and then you end up falling into Mistweaver category because it does more damage, or you need to do more healing and then it ends up falling into Druid territory. Disc Priest is like still very good, but very much like an in-betweener where it might not necessarily be the best at any one thing.
Yeah.
If that lasts past the race to world first, I don't know. I don't know if that's gonna last. We saw what triple monk for race to world first, Mistweaver monk.
Mistweaver's getting a damage nerf, money back guarantee. There's no way.
Yeah,
That's
like
that's one of the big concerns of Mistweaver right now is there are some classes like Mage where it can be good for a year and a half, and then they're like, let's buff fire by, or let's nerf fire by 3%, and then let's quadruple the damage that Arcane does. Like that's basically Blizzard shooting for Mage. But if a class like Mistweaver is ever, or like Windwalker is ever the best spec, there's just like alarms going off at Blizzard HQ. Alert, alert! Everyone jumps out of bed, slides down the fire poles into the basement, starts furiously typing in patch notes, everything getting nerfed. So I do worry that based off of last year where Evoker was very, very good and Golf was very good, and they sort of like waited for Race to World first and then gutted everything. The question is though, like, they could nerf it for Raid and have it still be good at M+. I don't know. So I don't really like to play around predicting, oh, Blizzard is going to nerf this or Blizzard is going to buff this. I think that's usually a trap, but I think it's a possibility for sure.
I think with how easy it is to gear a character as well, like there's no Especially like with a person like you who can play everything, who will play anything. You can just wait as long as you want and then just gear something else up after the fact.
Yeah.
It's not like the end of the world.
We also have 20 more item levels to go, right? Like around there.
Yeah.
So
a ton, yeah. I remember because I was doing like not once my priest got geared, I was looking at my item level and I was looking at the keys because I was sort of doing that math in my head too of like what's going to be good, what key levels are we going to do, and I was thinking to myself like, I don't know how high we'll go this season. Like it does seem like keys get pretty hard around like 14s. And then I looked at my item level and I was looking at max and I'm like, wait a second, like we still have 15 item levels to 20 item levels per character is so much. Like that is so much power that we still have to gain this season. So I think, I think it's way too soon to tell anything about high keys.
Does Mistweaver suck at healing Swamp Face, or am I just like getting pug healers? Because I can't tell.
Is this turning into the healer episode? I found that Mistweaver is actually the most difficult. Basically, Mistweaver has a lot of cooldowns that are very situational. Like, one cooldown is like really, really good, but you have to have it prepared and you have to be in melee. And like other cooldowns are like really good, but you have to stay still and you're not able to move. And it's like using all your cooldowns at the right spots and like knowing when you can use what is really, really important with that class. Versus like Druid, where it's just like put up all your hots and then just stand there, I feel like Mistweaver is like a lot more conditional and there's a lot more thinking. So in theory, throughput wise, Mistweaver does a lot of healing and it should struggle on that fight, and you're probably getting pug healered, but it also is like quite difficult compared to Disc Priest and Druid, which are just like mash all your buttons on CD and you'll be able to do like subsequent or enough AoE healing.
That makes sense. Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like it's kind of hard for me to tell, like because sometimes you're just like, dude, is this just LFG or like what's going on? Okay, so topics for today. We got the conclusion of the raid since the last show. Oh man, we got a lot to talk about the raid. Raid difficulty is getting another hit, and then just like various Mythic Plus, but we got a starting point. There was a new half spark that was available from the Revival Catalyst NPC after. I would, this is listed in our show notes as an exploit. I would not describe it as an exploit. I think it's just like it's just like a really bad oversight on Blizzard's end, and it's like a bug, right? Because within reason, you could have done this on accident. So what happened was players who didn't turn in their quest originally to get the spark, then went and got. And if they got a half spark from a world activity and then went and did the world event that gave them the new half spark and then combined it and then turned in that quest at the catalyst, got a second spark, and they got basically two halves there. And so it was something that Blizzard clearly didn't think through. And it was something that I personally accidentally almost did as well. But now Blizzard gave everybody a half spark.
So Friday night, everybody got to craft, and half the casters already crafted a one-hander, so that was fun. Then the other half should have just waited for a two-hander, but oh well, I guess.
This was weird. I'm shocked that they gave everybody an additional half spark, because next week they're going to have a half spark more than everybody else anyways, too. Still, this doesn't change anything.
Yeah, I mean, this was an issue that was even talked about before the tier started, because in the very first tier of the very first week of War Within, if I remember, you had two full sparks. And if you wanted, like, if your character wanted to craft you could craft a two-handed item with one spark. You could, right? Last season, you could craft a two-handed item with one spark. Am I correct?
You had two sparks.
Or did you have two sparks? That was Dragonflight.
Yeah.
Okay, so Dragonflight was right. Either way, you could craft a two-hander on week one if you wanted to. And so for certain classes, you want to craft a two-hander, right? Like that's just what you want to craft as your first craft. And going into this season, looking at everything, people were wondering, well, like the way that the quests and everything were set up, you were not going to have two full sparks to craft a two-hander. And everyone was kind of wondering because, like, you want to plan that out, right? Like if you're, trying to have optimal power in the first couple weeks. And then it ended up happening where you didn't have two sparks on the first week. And people were like, all right, I guess I'll just, craft an offhand or craft this or craft that. And then Friday rolls around and there's this, bug or exploit or whatever. I agree with Tettles. I don't like using the phrase exploit because people could have just done it accidentally.
Yeah.
It was just like super intern spaghetti code where essentially it was like, if you have a half spark in your inventory, take it to the guy and then remove the half spark. But like if you don't have it in your inventory because you used it to make a full spark, it just does nothing and you get a free half spark. And so, yeah, I mean,
It was clearly not intended. I'm shocked that they gave us a half spark.
it's so troll because like most guilds, like most people have spent their crests, because crests are a limited resource. So whatever your max level is that you're earning crests on, you probably spent that in the first 3 days of the week, right? Whether it's upgrading your weekly vault or just sending on other pieces to get stronger, you used your crest. So you couldn't really, unless you just happened to get lucky or you were saving them for some reason, you couldn't even craft a good item with that spark anyway. So they did this thing where they gave everybody a spark because now some people are going to be running around with 2 crafted pieces and some people are going to be running around with 0. And it's like, I don't know, it was a really, really weird situation. I mean, this is a case of like the whole thing sucks. It's not a huge deal, but it's like, we can't really say anything about it other than like Blizzard fix your game. Like, why did this happen in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, people are going to get more crests, I guess, today when you're watching this. So, but you also have the free heroic crest from killing Galley, crest, which otherwise wouldn't have been used. So that's what I used mine on.
Yeah. Which is probably why you should have 2 sparks at the very beginning of a season, right? I think this is just something that they should maybe think about next season. It's just like, you probably should just have 2 sparks at the very beginning of the season. You get the free enchanted heroic level crest from the campaign. If you want, you can slam a 2-hander weapon as well if you really want to. I don't know.
I think it's just the removal of heroic week. Because heroic week, you would get a spark last time.
Oh, yeah. I think that's actually exactly what it was, huh? I didn't really think about it like that. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, without the heroic week as well, like a lot of the race was spent doing splits, of which that is unwatchable content.
Yeah, so let's move into the conclusion of the raid since the last show. Yeah. So I calculated 5 out of the 12 days of the Race World First were dedicated purely to gearing up and doing splits. First off, should Blizzard look to address this from a Race World First perspective? And is this an issue for like all players, or is it just a Race World First problem?
I think it's almost strictly a Race to World First problem. I can see some players, quote unquote, like feeling overwhelmed on the first week of the patch or whatever, being like, oh man, I have too much stuff to do considering you raid Mythic. But at the same time, like a lot of those people are the people that are going to overload themselves with time anyway, like the Omega, people doing 2 or 3 sets of splits. Like ultimately, for 99.9% of players, you look at what difficulty you're going to start getting upgrades. That's a challenge for you. And then you go into that difficulty or maybe 1 below to farm up some tier, and then you just start progressing through the tier. And I feel like the heroic week for a majority of players it's just weird, right? Like I sort of get why they're doing like so. Basically, there's 2 big pros to heroic week. Number 1 is we don't know for sure, but almost certainly it helps with tuning. Like the thing is, people are really good at sandbagging when it comes to like PTR, on Twitter, the forums, right? People can sandbag. People can say their class is bad. As soon as you put a raid boss in front of them and then put Warcraft logs there, they can't help themselves. They no longer have the capabilities to do anything other than maximum damage that they're allowed to, right? So as soon as you bait everybody out with that heroic week, you get the exact real numbers that all these classes are doing.
Yeah.
And traditionally, that's how tuning has been at the beginning of patches. They stick this heroic week in front of everybody. Everybody tries to parse their ass off. Then they learn, okay, then there's a final tuning pass, usually between Friday and Sunday of that heroic week, and then Mythic gets released, right? So, especially with a tier like this, where the difficulty was a little bit wonky in Mythic, you could say that no heroic week sort of caused that. And then the other obvious reason that's like not that big of a deal, but I think people still appreciate is it just makes the Race to World First much more clean. You know, like they can do all their splits. Everyone knows that, you know, it's not time to do the Race to World First yet. They're just doing Heroic 19 times and 17 Gallywixes and 14 Mugsies. And then the Mythic race starts and everybody jumps in Mythic at the same time. And it's a much better viewing experience for people. I don't think that I don't think either issue is really that important though, because like, for example, when it comes to tuning, like almost nobody has fought any of the bosses pre-nerf.
Yeah.
Right? Like we're only talking about like, you know, the very top end guilds that are putting in tons of hours and splits, or the like really insanely good players. So I think that like I don't know. For a majority of people, they just want the content and they want it to be out. Especially Mythic Plus people, it feels really, really awkward to release all the raid content and then for you to be a Mythic Plus player and like, you know, they don't release Mythic Plus and then the rewards feel bad and it's I don't know. So personally, I'm a fan of no heroic week.
Yeah.
But I understand that I'm sort of making a sacrifice and making the Race to World First worse because I want my Mythic Plus now, so maybe that's a little bit selfish of me.
Do we think that we could create a system where you could actually get your Mythic Plus now and it wouldn't, you know, and the Heroic Week could exist? Because as somebody, like, I remember whenever they removed Heroic Week the first time, it to me, it just, like, it felt bad not being able to immediately go into Mythic because you needed to do, like, a large undertaking from the gearing perspective. But, like, I do also think, and this is like, I 100% agree with this. Like, you shouldn't gate people's Mythic Plus. Like, locking down specific levels, making it to where you can only do 7s for gear is like really stupid. Like, is there any way that it could be completely unlocked and there be a Heroic Week? Is that like that's something that could even happen?
So sorry to keep yapping. I do want to answer the question though real quick, and then I'll let Squishy get a word in. Sorry, but I think this tier they did a lot better job. I don't want to say better because as an M pluser, this is kind of annoying. But previously, the issue was like, look, why even do the raid if you get way better loot from M plus, right? Like it's pointless to do the raid. However, this tier, especially the raid, gives tier, which is like you can't get anywhere else. And the raid has these insane trinkets for basically every class that all the Mythic Plus trinkets and arguably even a lot of the jewelry is very hard to get and or bad. And so people are doing normal splits still on weeks 2 and 3 and still doing splits on weeks 2 and 3 because of this tier and because of these trinkets. So I think they're sort of changing the dynamic and changing the appeal to raid of like, these are the rare items that you can get for raid. And so I do like, I think if they did a heroic week this tier and then just had uncapped Mythic Plus, I think that would have been the best option.
Sure.
But for previous tiers, when they didn't have these OP trinkets or whatever, it wouldn't have been the same, right? Like I think there is a special appeal to raid this tier that isn't just the item levels.
I mean, all I was going to say on the topic was it's weird that they know that people, like, they delay the raid already by a week, right? Like, you know, we talked about it, I think, a couple episodes ago where the patch came out and the casuals get to do their story content and the raid and Mythic Plus have to wait a week. I don't think it's any worse if the Mythic raid is delayed another week after that. Like, there is a good subset of players who enjoy doing all the content. And when you combine the Mythic week and the Heroic week, Heroic then turns into a let's clear this as fast and efficiently as possible rather than taking your sweet time through it. And like, I don't think it's that bad, but also, yeah, I think Mythic Plus can just honestly release at that point. Like, raid trinkets, I'm pretty sure are just like some of the best things in the game right now. I'm pretty sure the dungeon trinkets suck. So like, there's still incentive to raid, and that's fine.
It's kind of
tier, as Growl said.
It's kind of weird because Mythic is already like such a small subset of players. Like most people who are going into the raid are probably going into the raid to get AOTC, right? Like that's most of what they're actually doing with the raid itself. I know that, you know, if you're watching the bench, you maybe are a Mythic raider, right? You're probably going to be a slightly more hardcore subset of players. But in general, I think that like most people who are trying to actually enter the raid are just there to try to get AOTC or just try, like Growl mentioned, just trying to get gear. So like, I don't even know if it would necessarily be an issue because like for a lot of Mythic guilds, like it is really annoying whenever Mythic is open and you can't go into Mythic because you haven't done your heroic to get all of your gear yet. That feels really bad. Like I've ran into that problem where a couple times where it's just like, we spent all week doing 3 heroic splits because that was what the best thing that we could possibly do long term was, but then we never got to go into Mythic, and it's just like, is this really what we should be doing? Like, is this really fun?
That was Drogo's guild week 1. We did basically 3 days. Like our normal 3 raid days were just 3 separate splits all the way through normal and all the way through heroic. Eventually we condensed a little bit. However, we didn't kill Gallywix in any of those splits. Then on Monday, the hope was like, kill Gallywix and kill 2 mythic bosses, but like, that was a lot, and we we ended up not actually killing heroic Gallywix on our first week. Everyone stuck around for like an extra hour after raid, and we did kill it. But like theoretically, within our normal raid hours, we didn't even get AOTC in a guild that was like well within cutting edge, and it's kind of ridiculous. But I mean, the splits are just really, really, really powerful, even for guilds that aren't like super nerdy but are willing to put in the time.
This is the result of them making it a 39 item level jump between tiers as opposed to the 26 that it was at some points. Like I do question. I don't know if we should go back, but it does make me question maybe going back to the slightly lower 26 item levels between tiers would be better for like cases like this.
I don't think it will. I think this is better overall, honestly.
I do tend to agree that I think it's better overall, but if it was only 26 item levels instead of 39, you would have less incentive for basically any guild that goes into Mythic ever to do splits. Like you're less incentivized then.
Yeah, I mean, you're less incentivized, but I think it's clear Blizzard's going in a direction where the season is a fresh start. Even with the change with like the catalyst, right? Like it used to be a heroic piece when you get when you get to 2K rating or AOTC, or the PvP objective that no one actually gets or what cares about. Now you get a catalyst charge. And I know people have a lot of issues with that, but I think the thing is that kind of gives you gear equivalent to where you are at and not where you skips you ahead kind of thing.
Yeah, we were going to talk about the catalyst charge with the Mythic Plus section. Do we want to just like get into that right now?
Sure.
So I've actually
we're going to be all over the place. There's so much to talk about.
There's so much stuff to talk about this show. So the Catalyst charge, a lot of Mythic Plus, I've seen this a lot from Mythic Plus only players. I made a tweet and it was like, let me hear your hot takes for the season, having the season been out for 2 weeks. I want to see like what people were thinking. I made a YouTube video about it. But one sentiment that I saw a couple of times was that the change of it being from going from a heroic piece to a catalyst charge was a massive L. And that's I think that's kind of interesting because like players immediately, the moment that they felt like something was taken away from them, they were like, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me.
I mean, yeah, it feels bad, right? Like you are getting something that you didn't get in the past. But from like trying to explain Blizzard's point of view here, in a way, if you were capable of doing that content, it's absolutely no change to you and possibly a benefit.
I think. Sorry, finish the thought.
For people that were like not at that level and using that heroic as above, like a stepping stone to get further ahead, yeah, it's a pretty, it's a nerf. But
what do you mean though? How do you get AOTC and not be at that level though? Like what exactly?
2K rating. So I think part of the problem is there was a bug. I don't know if you guys knew about this, where rating was massively inflated for I think a good couple of days on the start of the season.
Oh no, I didn't know that.
Do you remember seeing threads, people saying I completed a key and lost rating?
I thought that was a joke. I thought it was like a
No,
meme.
that was real. So remember like the last week before the patch came out, they did a lot of timer changes. It was going off the old timers rather than new timers.
Oh, so yeah, I vaguely remember this.
Even though it said Keystone failed and your key depleted, it still gave you rating or sometimes even Keystone Hero and the teleport as if the Keystone was a higher timer.
Oh.
And therefore, like, timing at 11 was actually less rating for me than my timed 10 early on in the week. So ratings were heavily inflated, which probably got a lot of people 10s or like 2K rating that barely did any 10s. Like you could probably do all 8s and get that inflated rating to 2K.
Yeah. To me, it's one of those things that like the system is already pretty good, and we kind of talk about the ease of gearing all the time. I think that there is honestly something here. I know that players are going to be upset whenever they have something that's more powerful taken away and given something that is worse. I mean, the catalyst charge just is worse for most people in most instances, right? There are some specific instances where you could catalyze a myth piece, but most people are just going to put it on a hero track piece. I think that we all agree with that. I think that the system is still cool and good enough to like Mythic Plus only players, where Blizzard can nerf it if they think it's too powerful, and it still be a good system. It's not like we're waiting 8 weeks for a catalyst charge anymore. I still think
God.
that, yeah, like right. You know, you can get a lot of gear from crafting. You know, it might not be the best. You know, a lot of trinkets from raid are gonna be pretty OP this tier, but you get a dinar, and so dinars are pretty good. You know, it's a little bit less good to get a catalyst charge than it is to get a straight up heroic tier piece. But at the same point, there's still a lot of options that Blizzard is giving for you to continue to progress your character. I think that this is going to be okay. Like, I do think that this is a slight nerf, but I think the system is still well designed to a point where it can tank a slight nerf and it be fine.
Yeah, I think people that are complaining about this system are just being whiny, I'll be honest. I think that the other system had some friction and was like a little bit weird. So two of the examples that come to mind for me right away are, number one, the vendor, like, how many stories did you hear of like people buying the wrong piece or like buying the PvP equivalent or whatever? Like, it was just so, you know, as opposed to just being like, hey, I'm doing dungeons or I'm doing the raid. It's just like a nice treat, right? It's like, hey, I earned KSM, I get a tier piece, like I cleared the raid. Oh, maybe I didn't get a token from my raid leader, but at least I have this, right? Like, it's a really, really good feeling to just like earn that. Another weird thing is like all of the tier pieces are different item levels, right? So like, for example, you go to the vendor and like, you know, one of the items might be 658.
Oh yeah.
Another item might be 649 or whatever. And so like, depending on just the pure RNG of how the items that you got happen to lay out, like you might feel like you're getting owned. Like for me, it's like, oh, I already have a normal helm, but the helm is like by far the best value piece, and I'm just like, you know, damn it, I'm the best piece that I'm supposed to buy is the lowest item level piece on the vendor. And overall, it just like, not saying that these are like huge problems, but I feel like exchanging a catalyst charge for the achievement is just a really nice, clean way to go about it, as opposed to having like the weird vendor. And I think that if you're complaining about it, it's sort of just like, you know, I want my piece or whatever. Like, you know, it's just such a fringe difference, because like basically what Squishy is saying, right, is like, let's say you're doing all, I don't remember what the level is, but like times 6s or whatever, where you have the AOTC thing. It's like, okay, well you're potentially getting a 655 or 658 item when most of your other gear is like 649, right? Which is like, I don't know, so small, you know? It's just like such a non big deal for people to like get worked up on. I think it's a much cleaner system.
Realistically, hero gear is a lot easier to come by this season as well. I mean, you still have delve tier 8s. You still have, I mean, and then you have 7s this time, drop from end of dungeon, which is better than 8s. And the dungeons are just easier. Like,
yeah,
they're just easier.
I'm actually glad that they hit the entire dungeon pool with a 10% health and damage nerf. If nothing more than just to make the season easier. I actually, like, I think that 10s last season were just way too hard for people. Like, we kind of talked about that at length last season. I think that they just like launched way too hard. Blizzard just like overlooked the thought process of like, okay, this is just a bit much for people. And it's like, I don't think that 10s necessarily need to be that hard. And you can get people to kind of continue to push up with the 3k IO mount. I think that people will start to continue to push with rewards that are more on the line. And so you don't have to make 10s this insanely difficult thing.
Yeah, I would argue that they're not even really that much easier. Just the ramp up of, you know, the way that the gearing works, the way that the dungeons work, the way that the keystone levels work is just more clean. Like, I think it just feels better and feels easier because it's, you know, like, it just feels like you're also rewarded a lot more for like doing 7s, 8s, 9s or whatever, and also like you're getting rewarded more for doing higher keys.
Yeah,
like I don't think this is a big deal, but I mentioned that I was playing a couple of my alts, and it's like you get more gilded crests for doing higher keys. And so I was talking with some people about how, like, you know, you get to this point in the season where doing farm for gear keys is like really freaking boring and everyone's like so sick of it. But like at the same time, you know, let's say I'm gearing up a healer, I'm not trying to troll my team and go to some really hard key that I can't heal, like, and waste everybody's time. But now it's like, well, we get a bunch more gilded crests for doing them, you know, so you at least feel like, oh man, I healed that key and I got 18 gilded crests or whatever, which I was kind of like a Gilded Crest or no big deal person, but I guess like getting more stuff for free always feels good. So I don't know. I guess I'm a fan of that change too.
I think Mythic Plus this season is sick. Like I'm
Oh,
a
it's so
huge fan. I think that people that don't even like Mythic Plus have been saying nice things about Mythic Plus, which should tell you a lot.
I still need to like try tanking this season. I haven't yet, just because I've been working on all the raid stuff. But like, I want to try tanking. It seems way more fun though because tanks are playing alts again. Healers I think are doing a lot better after the nerfs, but I feel like there's still some standout things like the tolls and priory that are just like my face.
Dude, I think that's a combination of like, yeah, the mobs hit a little bit too hard, but also like you shouldn't be pulling 3 of those unless you have Growl healing your group. Like, come on, we gotta know what we gotta play to our audience a little bit here.
Yeah. But I will also say, for Blizzard's credit, they have really targeted some of the nastiest things in Mythic Plus so far.
Yeah.
Like, Throw Rock got a nerf. That thing was mean as hell. They hit a lot of the single target casts. I think there's still some work to be done, but overall, I think they've done really good.
Yeah, I've been pretty happy with the season. I think overall I'm enjoying it. Things are it's hard to say because I haven't really done like hierarchies yet. Like to me, that sort of experience is very important. But I think I don't know. From what I've heard, I'm just hearing a very nice balance. Like we're talking about things being easier and like people doing tens, but they're not free. Like go into pugs, do some like 8s, 9s, 10s, especially people that are still progging that level. They are not free. Like it is still definitely a feeling of accomplishment if you do those keys. And I do keep referencing this group, but it's just a nice like sample size of the people that I played Classic with started like a guild. They've been playing together, and like the keys, watching them, it feels like very true to what it should be. Like when they go into a 10 or whatever because they have like somebody that's good playing with them, or they happen to push one up, like they have to lock in or they're feeding. Like I've seen some 50, 60 death, like 20, 30-minute overtimers. But at the same time, like 7s, 8s, 9s are like, reasonable challenge. And maybe you can bring like one friend along who kind of sucks or doesn't have gear, but like you can't totally troll. And overall, it feels like the path is reasonable. And then I do think too, we're talking about how much item level we have to gain. Things will get even better as we get later on in the season too, because then these keys really will start to feel easy, right? Like knocking out a weekly 10 when you're 675 item level or 670 item level or whatever will be like a fucking breeze for almost anybody, which I think it should be, right? Like doing the keys early on in the season is like kind of a challenge, and then at the same time, like if you're just trying to do your weekly vaults or whatever later on because you're working on the last boss or PvP or whatever, like you should be able to just slam those out easily.
This feels way better beginning of the season. I'm so stoked. I also have a hot take. I think that Prot Warrior, if it doesn't receive a damage nerf, might end up being the best tank this season.
Ooh.
I know that a lot of people have been playing Venge, and I think that Venge is the best tank survivability wise. But I think that Prot Warrior's damage is so undeniable that I think that if it doesn't get nerfed, it probably gets nerfed. But if it doesn't get nerfed, I think it might be the best tank.
Interesting.
I've been seeing there's variety of tanks, variety of healers. Don't you love this part of the season where we all just kind of pretend that this is the season that changes everything? We all just enter this illusion that nobody cares about meta. We can all play whatever tank, and yeah, I don't know. I guess this might be a bad take, but it's kind of fun sometimes, is the idea that investing a ton of time in getting gear on one character just means that character's good, right? Like you can play a character that like kind of sucks or whatever, but if you're like that character in your raid and you're getting loot funneled all that gear and you're 5 item levels above everyone in your group, like you're just gonna do good damage, right? Like if you're a tank and you just have giga tank gear and you've been playing it all season, like no matter what tank you have, you're gonna just feel giga and just be like, indestructible. And I think that like that's kind of cool, and it harkens back a little bit to RPG stuff. Eventually, once everybody gets geared and then you realize that Fire Mage and Windwalker Monk shit on your DPS and you need to reroll and no one wants to invite you, that's another story. But yeah, I do think like, the short period at the beginning of the season where we can all kind of pretend that like, all the, whatever you play, if you're good at it, you can do good damage and people will invite you, I think is very fun.
What if now that the race is over, Blizzard comes in and it's like, Og, it's back.
No, not again, man. No, not again.
That's
squishy.
Dude,
be nice.
No, but honest question though here, but this was the new affix week, the Pulsar. How have you found this affix?
I honestly find all the affixes to be kind of easy. I don't really find any of them to be too egregious, just in general. Uh, I don't find Ascension or Ascendant Orbs to be that bad either. Like, I never really found any of them to be too bad.
Fair enough.
I like that every class, more or less, has an equal way to deal with it.
Okay.
I think that's one of the big problems of all the affixes is that, you may play a class that completely nullifies it, or you may play a class that does absolutely nothing, and you just stand there and watch your team not do it.
Yeah.
I like that it creates a little back and forth play with your team, and you're sort of interacting with, like, you always have that dumb guy that's just chasing the orb, and then you have the two dumb guys, and they're like chasing each other's orbs, and you just see them, like, it sort of like creates that like team play social like thing that's fun for dungeons where it's like not a super big deal. I also like, this is all the affixes, but I like that when it happens, it's not like, oh well, if you don't do two of the orbs, your whole team explodes. Like, the way it works is like, it gives them a damage reduction and damage buff, and so even if you're fighting a really hard boss, it's like, oops, we just messed up two orbs, everybody press defensives, and it sort of like doesn't feel like you're immediate. Like, the punishment for the older affixes was so much higher than this one, and I like that as well. So I'm a fan overall. I mean, it's a little clunky and a little weird. To me, the biggest problem is the Z-axis of it.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that being a bit jank
Like,
as
if
well.
you're in a situation where you're walking uphill, like for example in Priory, when you finish the second boss and you're like, if you're on any of the stairs like walking up, it's just like good luck trying to get anybody's orb.
Workshop has that as well, but like for me, I think this is one of the best affixes they've designed. The goal is the simplest it could be: collect the orb,
Soak
right?
ball.
Like, it just soak ball. But in theory, the number, like Growl said, there is so much complexity that comes with a very slowly rotating orb around you that like it's very entertaining to watch. I've seen a number of my guildies not understand that it's attached to them a fixed difference and just constantly carry it on a stick, chase their own orb. Like, why can't I get this? It's like it's so funny.
I also think I think it being as easy as it is, there's also like some nice gimmicks that you can do with it, where if you extend the 4 to the 5 stack, you can like kind of game the duration. Like, obviously nobody's really going to be trying to do that because but at the same point you could if you really wanted to try to gain as much mastery as possible.
And the biggest thing I think is you have 15 seconds to do it. So if there's a bad boss overlap, like Cujo box or something, like if quaking happened while you're behind Cujo's box, you just like you might explode. But this is like, okay, we'll just finish the box mechanic, then we'll do it. And like it feels like affixes have come such a long way. I'm so happy.
Yeah, no,
I'm so happy.
That's why whenever you ask how I felt about it, like I feel the same about Pulsar as I do all the other affixes. Like, I think they're all like pretty good. Like, they don't feel like they're overly punishing. They don't feel like they're always in my way. And whenever I do them correctly, I get this nice stat bonus. Oh, cool, that's nice. Okay, where do we want to go next? We're gonna talk about MDI and TGP, I guess.
Sure.
Well, I feel like we kind of skimmed over the end of the raid, unless you wanted to save that.
Oh no, we were
talking about the begin. We talked about the beginning of the raid, and we were catching up, and then we kind of got derailed.
There's a lot of raid to be talked about here.
Let's get Mythic Plus done.
Okay,
that's fair.
The last thing that we have for Mythic Plus is MDI and TGP added a new variety rule, and Squishy immediately DM'd me about this variety rule.
Hold on. Let me get what added the variety rule.
So the MDI and the TGP are
MDI and TGP.
It's now just the MDI.
Okay, so just the MDI like that's I guess what I wanted to point out is MDI, the old format, is gone, right?
MDI or TGP, I think, is taking over for the MDI is what's going on here.
So basically there have been side by side MDI, which is doing like mid-level dungeons, doing huge pulls very quickly, versus TGP, which is doing as high as possible keys. There were like two different formats that have been running side by side now for almost 2 full expansions or 3 full expansions. Now they're getting rid of the middle keys speedrunning format, and it looks like they're just only going to pushing the highest keys format, which I think is like kind of a big deal, and I think a lot of people have been asking about this for quite some time. That's why I kind of didn't want to skip over that.
Okay,
But yeah,
so there's a variety rule thing that Squishy I know is very interested in. So explain this to the viewers. Explain exactly what they're doing here.
Yeah, so apparently for groups and only groups but not the finals, they are going for each day they're going to count which specs each team plays. And at the end of the day, the top 3 most played specs are now banned for your team for the rest of the remaining days. So to my understanding, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, Tettles, basically each day you have to figure out what you want to get banned while still making sure to qualify for the next day. Is that about right?
Yeah, for a run to count towards the tally, the dungeon must be completed in time and must contribute towards the team's progress in overall score tiebreakers. All runs that helps the teams progress the tournament will not count, just their best in each dungeon at the end of the day. So it's determining what the most played specialization is relative to what you finished that day with as your highest key.
Yeah. Well, no, it says not just their best in the dungeon.
Oh yeah, is it old? Yeah.
Oh
that's
yeah,
what I was
sorry,
wondering.
not just their best in the dungeon.
So if you do a 15, all those specs will count. Then you do
Actually,
a 16, then those will count.
I think
and so on and so forth.
I think I misunderstood this thing. Yeah, okay, so it's not just their best, it's
Yeah.
all dungeons. So in theory, depending on how many levels, like how low the keys start, you could maybe game this a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, you completely game it. No,
Well,
you. That's like what Squishy said. You literally start off and you think, what specs do I ban? And then you build your entire strategy around what you play to that, right?
But there's also a little bit of a meta game because let's say like if you want to play the let's say there's a BIS comp, a god comp, and you want to play them the last day, you have to make sure that specs that aren't that get banned on the earlier days, but that will make you those days keys weaker. And that's the problem. If every other team plays God comp on the first day and you don't, and they just beat you, you just lose on the first day.
Yeah.
So are there still eliminations each day? Because I know they've gone back and forth on that.
They've changed the format. Like the total format is a little bit different. So the total format is what we had last season during the TGP, where it is for group play, where day 1 is 4 teams, day 2 is 4 teams, and the top 2 teams from day 1 make it to day 3, and the top 2 teams from day 2 make it to day 3, and then those teams battle it out. And so the specs are like that you played on your day 1, not just day 1, but like your day 1, or that's where the ban comes in for day 3.
So
good.
Sorry, I just want to make sure to clarify because are there 2 different sets of maps then? So like for example, the maps from day 1 don't carry over to the maps to day 3.
So how we did it last season, and I don't know how they're doing it this season, but how it was done last season was there was a map that was shared between the 2 pools, right? You got 3 maps on day 1, you got 3 maps on day 2, and one of those maps was shared, and then you got then you got the 3 unplayed maps on day 3. 4? No, there's no way.
But basically, day 3, what happens on day 1 has no consequence to day 3.
Exactly,
other than who makes
at all. It literally at all, except for who makes it into day 3.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense, and that's a lot better. Because what Squishy and I were sort of thinking, right, was about like, oh, you play the bad comp in the lower keys, but you'll have to do the same amount of lower and higher keys on both days, right? It's a 2-day event where basically you have to make it out of your group, and then you have to play the last group to win. And so it's like, if you can't use like if you, I guess you can't use a bad comp for the lower, like if you use a bad comp on the lower keys of day 1, like it hurts you more than I guess initially the old format.
I mean, it's a brand new meta, right? Like if you play a bad comp on the low keys, you could miss a +3, which sets you back time.
Yeah,
like, it's a question of where do you like compared to, you have to there's a little like game theory here. How hard are the enemy teams going? Are they playing the god comp day 1, at which point you might need to as well to make sure that you stay on pace with them, or are they playing shit and you just want to qualify so you play god comp and just accept like a harder day 3?
Yeah,
so it's like
okay, as I say, here's the format. So at the Teams in each group will be split into 2 sets of 4 by time trial seeding. Each day, teams will tackle 3 dungeons, which will have predetermined sets of affixes. There's no way they're going to have affixes. And a base keystone level that they'll start with. The top 2 teams at the end of Friday and Saturday will advance to Sunday. And so then the teams will run the dungeons during the allotted competition period, and we'll push keystones according to the in-game timer.
Yeah. So overall, this is going to create, at least their goal and the way I see it playing out, is it's going to create a much, much better viewing experience for 2 different reasons. Number one is the obvious one. My spec doesn't get played. Where's my feral druid that you always see in every single tournament? The thing is, people are going to be more incentivized to bring out other specs or try new things, right? The other situation where it's going to make things better is, let's say we have a group, right? It's us 3. We're all the 3 team captains. We have some 4th team that sucks, right? And so me and Squishy are like the 2 best teams, right? And then Tettles is like the 3rd team that's like kind of there maybe if one of us throws, right? Our team and my team and Squishy's team are thinking about the finals, and we're trying to make sure that we don't get the best specs banned. Tettles' team, that's kind of like the underdog, is like, hey, screw it. If we make the finals, that's already a dub. So Tettles is just slamming every single key with the best possible comp, and and the 3rd place team has a little bit of an advantage there if they want to sacrifice their late game or their chances on the last day. And on top of that, if Tettles happens to make it to the last day, it's like, well, now Tettles he's got to come up with some weird stuff, right? And so not only are people going to be like, undecided on who they root for because they have Tettles playing Tettles is the underdog, but he's also playing, Mage Og, whatever, so no one wants to root for him. But then on the last day, he's playing like some weird stuff while everyone else is playing Mage Og. So I'm optimistic about the changes. The obvious biggest downside is that all competitive dungeon formats in WoW are so insanely time consuming and difficult to the players. And I feel like this is only going to, being able to multi-class was already so insanely valuable for these teams. And this is only going to make being able to multi-class more valuable, especially for players who are like super well known at being really good at one class. I mean, those players basically aren't even going to be allowed to play, right? Like, imagine if you're somebody who is the Omega Lord of Enhancement Shaman, and let's say, it's hard to imagine a world where that isn't the best class, but, if you play Enhancement Shaman every game on day 1, then your class is just banned on the last day, and it's like, I feel like generally the people who bring the spec diversity and show off cool things are people like that, right? Like one tricks who play classes that aren't necessarily the best. Like, this is going to bring more classes, but at the same time, it's going to be, people like Gingy and Cryptics and, the people that already just play every spec very, very well anyway. And they're like, well, so it's a hit or a miss, but overall, I think I'm optimistic that it's going to improve the viewer experience.
I do think that, at least for DPS, most people who are able and capable of playing in a TGP probably have like 2 specializations in their bag. Like, I do think that most of them can play 2 specs. Now, obviously, I don't think all of them can, but like realistically, I think that, especially if you give them enough time, they probably can pick up another specialization. Mm-hmm. Or you can play around it, right? Like, or you can play around them, and then make sure that their one trick spec doesn't get banned in some capacity.
Yeah, it's only 3 as well. So if you run the same 5, I believe you only need to choose. It gets banned in order of tank, healer, DPS, I think.
Yes, that is correct.
So if you want to protect your DPS, you just need to run the same amount of tanks and healers as those DPS.
I remember when I talked to Yips about this, he goes, "Oh, that's good. I can play every tank."
Yeah, I think the pressure will definitely go on healers and tanks, especially, like healers, for example, right? I'm sure there will be a lot of dungeon where the healer that you bring doesn't necessarily make or break things. Like, if there's a huge healer check, obviously you want to bring the best healer, but for a lot of dungeons, it's like you could bring the 2nd or 3rd best healer very easily. So I think the meta is going to evolve into sacking your healer and your tank as well as 1 DPS on day 1. But at the same time, the consequence of that is still, you're going to have to play some different DPS on day 1, right? Like, if you're sacking your tank and healer, well, that means you have to play Like, how does it work if it's a tie? So, for example, I don't know if they mentioned this or if you know Tettles, but let's say
healer, and then DPS.
How does it work for the DPS? Are they spinning a wheel for the? I actually don't know how it works for the
remember that, but I just remember it saying something like tank healer DPS.
That I know because I asked about that in a meeting as well, but like I don't know how it determines between the three DPS.
I think if you can get this changed, if there's anybody that happens to be in this call that's a part of that maybe has something a say in that, you should make it just DPS. You should reverse that order and then make it so it's like DPS are the prio ban if there's a tie, because I think people are gonna you're already incentivized to force ban tanks and healers, if that makes sense, because I feel like those are the least likely to be super OP or like a cornerstone of a strategy. Whereas, like, if you, like, let's just say you tie then you might not even care, right? Like, what if you just go into day one, you run the God comp minus a different tank and healer, and you just run the same comp every single dungeon, you get your tank and healer banned, then you pick a new tank and healer, you lose one of your DPS, but then you just run it down again with the God comp on day, or like, imagine like
at that
Mage
point it's
Og
not
X.
just the God comp, it's just, okay. If it was Mage and Og, and you were just like, you built your
but
comp okay.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, I think switching up the DPS will be a lot more interesting. I don't know if that would fly, but I would much rather see the DPS be the prio ban in the event of a tie than the tanks and the healers. Force people, if they want their tank and healer to get banned, that they have to play different DPS on day one, is what I'm saying. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. All right, you know what? That's interesting.
Sorry to any competitors if I just made things harder, but as a spectator, that's what I want to see.
I have no say in this, but I do know that WoW Esports people watch our podcast, so they might see it.
Well, hopefully one of us can throw stuff at the wall and maybe something we'll see.
For me personally, though, I'm just excited to watch this and see how it goes. Like this is like we talked about in the past. Like I don't watch MDI anymore. This will get me to at least watch and see how it goes. So
I think it'll be cool.
I think it will too. And it's not in the finals. And I know Tettles and I talked about this. Like, we'll see how it goes in groups. But if it's good, maybe they'll apply it to the finals too.
I think it's the best to not have it applied to the finals, at least the first time we see it.
I agree.
Because I think that the cool part of the TGP just in general is the ability to be able to see the highest keys done. And once you start researching comp, of course there's going to be some, level of like you're going to not be able to necessarily do the highest key possible, although you might be able to do it within half a key level or something like that, so you end up on the same number, but it's not going to be as fast as if you're playing the best comp or something like that. So I do think that it makes sense that it's not in the finals. At the same point, yeah, maybe it's something that everybody universally likes so much that they just keep.
Well, we'll have to see.
Okay, let's talk about the raid. Okay.
The commenters were quick to jump on everybody who was saying that this is going to be a super hard raid and that, Gallywix would be super impossible or that Muggsy was going to be super impossible, because all of the commenters clearly knew that Gallywix was going to be a sub 100 pull boss and the raid was going to be seen as too easy, and we're all idiots and our podcasts have aged like sour milk or whatever they keep writing.
Okay, so let's see the conclusion since the last show. Sprocketmonger died. Echo got rolled for Sprocketmonger. Liquid failed to kill Sprocketmonger week 1. The fight ended up being around 100-ish pulls, but it's a fight that dramatically gets easier with gear. Basically, the end of this fight is like, if you dodge the bullet hell, you win the fight. The more gear you get, the less opportunities you actually even have to interact with the bullet hell, including maybe even skipping the last beta launch sequence if you have even enough damage. I don't know if it's possible. It might be possible for some people at some point. Then guilds moved on to One Arm Bandit. One Arm Bandit's probably around like a 50 to 60 pull boss. I think it is a big strategy check, and once you have the strat done, like know what boss is getting fed what coin when, it becomes a lot easier. I think that it also was 3 healed, which this and Rick Reverb were both 3 healed. It's a little bit surprising because the last phase damage check was rather tight. It wasn't like the hardest thing ever. And again, similar, I think that once you get more gear, you probably bump it up to 4 healers just to make the last phase a little bit more consistent. And the final phase damage check probably just won't be as hard whenever you are getting there with a little bit more gear or Galagio Loyalty Club. Muggsy had one of the hardest heal checks I've ever seen, where it was 5 healed, and it could have been 6 or 7 healed, realistically, and the healers still would have had HPS left to give, and this was one of the craziest fights ever. Echo and Liquid both downed it in around 150-ish pulls, and this required one of the most ridiculous comp stacks I've ever seen, where Void Elves, Transcendence, Warlock port, displacement. I didn't even know this. Like, I haven't even heard of this talent in years. Like, alter time. Making sure that you're able to get out of your Galagio goon cage was a literal requirement for this fight. I expect this fight to get changed because it's ridiculous, and we'll talk about this in a second. And I think this would kill Drogo's guild.
Yeah,
Again.
you're scaring me now. I was relieved at the bull counts, but I actually didn't get to watch too much
that
of the
fight.
Prog, though, and now you're scaring
That
me.
fight is nonsense. And then Gallywix was like a meme boss where, you know, you see easy end bosses sometimes. Like Sarkareth was 120 pulls or something like that. And Gallywix died in 100 pulls to liquid. But then Echo came up and killed it in 49 pulls. The only real mechanic on this fight is like the bombs and the bomb clamps, which it's like a pass-fail mechanic where if somebody dies after having carried a bomb, they immediately wipe your raid, which normally is like a historically pretty difficult mechanic, but nothing on this fight did damage. Like the heal absorbs weren't that hard, and so then the raid ended up turning into like 500 some odd pulls. You know, most raids are probably in the 500 600 pull range, but half the raid difficulties normally backloaded into the final boss, and so now we were talking about this raid being historically hard, and now people are kind of clowning on it, including our title of this video, even kind of memeing about how the raid was easy. But yeah, so that was the conclusion of the raid since the last show. How are you guys feeling about how the raid concluded?
All right. Well, I think there's an important distinction to make, and I'm gonna be championing this, and I'm gonna be fighting down anyone who tries to argue. There's two different things. Okay, there's the raid, the patch, and the race to world first. I think a lot of things for this raid, or for a lot of things for this race to world first, went wrong. I think heroic week being gone made the race to world first worse. I think the difficulty of the bosses as Liquid and Echo approached them made the race to world first feel a little bit wonky. I think the end boss being a lot easier than people expected, and it was cool that it was new, but it didn't have that secret phase thing that everyone was really hoping for. I think there were a lot of the things about that were disappointing about the race to world first that were very out of the player's hands, right, when it comes to Blizzard. When it comes to the raid itself and the difficulty of the bosses and the scaling that every other guild in the world is going to reach, I think it's freaking great. I think that every boss, like multiple bosses being about 100 pulls, and I think that, a lot of these mid bosses getting gutted and the end bosses still probably being pretty hard for guilds that, don't have their own private chefs and weak order developers, I think is still going to be spot on and a great raid for nearly anybody else. And I don't like the talk of this raid sucks, this raid is easy, this raid is disappointing. I can understand if you say that about the race to world first, but not the raid.
I agree with that. I think you can say what you want about galley tuning specifically. Like, I do think it's weird that if a last boss is on the lower end of a pull count, because that's what people expect. And you could say that the race to world first was disappointing because to a lot of viewers it was. That's probably the truth. But the raid still owns
it. I just don't like the difficulty curve. I think that the difficulty curve is the only thing that I necessarily have a problem with. I think that Styx and Sprocketmonger being the hardest fights and Muggsy being the hardest fights this tier feels really weird. Like I do think that they nerfed Styx again since our last episode, funnily enough. They not only did they nerf it once, but they nerfed it twice because they were like, no more. But that's good. I don't think that Styx should have been that hard in the first place. But then, you have Sprocketmonger and Muggsy probably being the two hardest fights this tier. And that's just wrong. Like, I don't think that you should have that regardless of what happened. Like, I don't think fights should be Ansarek level difficulty. That was stupid. But also, I don't think that the end boss should be as easy as Gallywix is. This isn't Shade of Xavius, but it's close-ish. There are going to be guilds that are going to kill this boss in... I think that there might be a guild that kills this boss in 30 pulls at some point.
I will say one thing.
Yes.
I think people are sleeping on Gallywix because they may not understand the mechanics or anything like that. There are 5 people in your raid that if they ever die for any reason, the raid blows up. And Race to World First has gamers in their raid. Like, they're going to be able to stay alive. And Fire Mage, as I know Max talked about it, a lot of people talked about, they're immortal this tier for the most part. And they put 4 of those bombs on a Fire Mage and 1 of those on a tank. Like, those people were not dying. In a more normal comp, I think it's entirely possible that as you start going down the CE ladder, guilds are going to struggle with that debuff more and more.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's a hard pass fail check, but I do think that I suspect that a guild like Northern Sky could probably kill this boss in like 30 pulls.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be really easy for a good chunk of guilds, and then you're going to start seeing the skill difference, and it's going to become a little more difficult for some guilds because, like, there are just some things like, the little like moving electricity things, like you trip on that, you take damage, you die, like,
Yeah.
or you miss soak or a bad blaze or anything like that. Like, there's things that could happen where those people just die and your raid blows up. But Liquid, Echo, Method, all full of gamers, like, they're not going to wipe to that very often.
By far, I think the coolest part of Gallywix was that the Dungeon Journal didn't have all the information on the fight, so there was like a level of blind prog on it. I thought that was cool.
Yeah. I mean, I've talked about that a lot. I want more blind frog like that. Like, in actuality, kind of the entire thing was a secret phase.
Mm-hmm.
Most people can't tell from the video, but all of his abilities were different.
Yes.
Like, the post that I said, like, instead of doing the frontal from phase 1 on heroic, he did that on phase 3, but it was different. The healing absorb was different. It was more of a spirit link style healing absorb. You could see the tethers. Like, it wasn't that noticeable from the broadcast, so people just assumed it was like reused mechanics or anything like that. But no, the fight was different with different abilities. It was like mechanic break. So
it was a little bit slow, and I think that it ended up leading towards a boss that appears to be pretty undertuned.
Yeah, I want to fight the boss until I make a judgment.
Okay,
yeah. I think that, like, to me, I don't know. I guess we'll see, but everything that I've heard about it doesn't sound bad to a normal person. Like, one of the biggest problems that I have is, like, a lot of the way that difficulty comes in Mythic bosses is overlaps. Like, basically, they introduce you a bunch of mechanics, and then in Mythic, it's like, okay, well, what if you have to worry about this and this? And sometimes it's this and that and that. And it's like, well, a lot of times they end up being either RNG, depending on who it goes on or where it is in the room. It ends up being very frustrating. It ends up being like, a lot of things that just aren't really that fun, to the point where, like, people even really start to appreciate like dance style bosses where it's like super, super scripted and everything is exactly the same every time, right? And I think that, I don't really think that, like, I guess I'll just sort of wait and see, right? Because on one hand, it's like my guild isn't going to be doing the same damage that Liquid can do, but also we're going to have probably way better gear because it's going to take us a few more weeks to get there. And so I'm just interested to see that offset of, like, how much better is Liquid's players than me or our guild, and the fact that they have worse gear but are better players, and, like, because I think if it's like not a mechanically dense boss, but it's just like bullet hell and a very big throughput check, and it feels challenging to our guild, to me that's like actually kind of a sick end boss, and I think that's kind of what they were going for.
We can talk about it once you guys reach it. Ultimately, you're going to probably end up getting at least 2 ticks of the Galagio Loyalty Renown rewards club. So you get one the day that this is released, so tomorrow, whenever we're recording this, and then you get you'll get one more 3 weeks from now. You'll probably be on Gallywix around that time, if I had to guess.
I mean, I think Muggsy will actually be pretty difficult for most guilds as well. Like, some guild, like,
dude, they gotta change that fight. There's just no way. The class stack is unreasonable.
Yeah. I also think you're gonna have a problem with pushing. It's not like you can push faster on that fight right now, right? Like, let's say you get 3% damage next week. You're still sitting there until your cooldowns come up, and then you push at the exact same time as before. So it doesn't make the healing check any easier.
Well, I guess, unless you're waiting on healing cooldowns. So they were, during the world first kills, they were pushing at like 5:15, and they held their 2-minute CDs from the 4-minute all the way up until 5:15. They held it a minute and a half, minute 15 seconds. But, like, so they were already being held on their offensive CDs. If you have to wait for a healing CD, it's going to be a little bit different. I don't know what that looks like. But
that was one. The second thing you need to wait for is the rocket in the middle.
Oh,
because you need the fire in the middle. Unless you're doing a completely different strategy, you need the fire in the middle and one fire on each edge to deal with all the mechanics.
That's true.
Unless you're going to slip and slide the entire last phase, but I don't know about that one, Chief.
I think that they need to change how the goon cage works. Like, I don't know how much you watched of that boss, Growl, but it's a smoke bomb. And so the meta strat was the person who was getting the Galagio goon cage, they would, if they were the person who was supposed to be in it, great, that's fantastic. If they weren't, then they would either get Evoker rescued out frame perfect or Prescript out frame perfect, assuming that they can't like Void Elf out or something like that, or port out themselves. Then there was specifically assigned hit squads of players that were supposed to go into these determined goon cages, and there was a weak core that popped up that told them which one to go into. And they had to go kill the goons inside and then use Transcendence or Warlock port. I think those were like the only two abilities. Oh, Demon Hunters. Demon Hunters could double jump VR out. Cool, I guess. But that was it. Otherwise, you actually couldn't kill the goon and get out in time, because otherwise you're going to be sitting in the cage for an additional 15 seconds waiting to get broken out. So it's just not doable the way that Blizzard intended for it to be done, and I think that fight needs to get changed.
It's weird because you need like 3 to 4 people to soak the initial drop, but you only need 1 or 2 to kill the goon. Otherwise, you're sitting there for 10 seconds doing nothing.
By far the biggest issue with that fight's the smoke bomb. Also, the reason that you have to have Mistweavers on that fight is that Mistweavers heal through the bomb. Most other healers can't actually heal through the bomb. Like Disc Priest can with Atonement, but the Atonement has to already be pre-applied. Most healers can't actually heal through the bomb, but Disc can, or Mistweaver can.
I think what they will do, now that the race is over, is just nerf it so that the number of cages doesn't increase.
So it's just always 2?
It's just always 2, I think. Or maybe they'll do 2, 3, and then that's it. Like, that's what they did with Ansarek, right? Ansarek went 2, 3, 4, and they nerfed it to 2, 3, 3. I think they probably do something similar. Just either 2, 3, 3 or 2, 2, 2.
Cages were hard-coded in the last phase to be 4. I mean, I guess.
Were they?
Yeah, I don't think it was an incrementing number. I saw it in spell data at some point.
Oh, okay.
Because I was wondering if it was supposed to go to 5 ever, and the answer was no. Thank God.
Yeah, I talk about sometimes healers or mechanics or bosses or fights that are fun for healers. This seems like absolute ultimate misery and despair. We're talking line of sight. We're talking DPS needing to execute stuff. We're talking about DPS needing to everyone go to the right spot. Tons of people with very important roles. Me just sitting there. Like, this sounds absolutely miserable.
I think it's going to get changed. I think the Goon Cage as a mechanic has to get changed, because, like, if you don't have the comp stack for it, I don't know how killable the boss is.
Honestly, what I think they might do in hindsight, instead of introducing number of cages, they'll just change the mechanic to be heroic, where once you kill the goon, it just knocks you out.
Fine. Like, that's totally fine as well. Like, the intended mechanic, I get it. You're supposed to use... I think that they wanted you to, like, leave bombs rooted on the side and, like, have them blow up the wall or something like that. But,
yes, but I'm pretty sure.
Nobody's doing that shit. And then the icicles come out at, like, an okay time to break you out, but you'd be sitting in there for 15 seconds without a healer, like, waiting to get broken out, and that just feels bad. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think it was a cool idea and concept. Like the one with the ad shield, you need the other side's like finger gun to break the shield. That was cool. But bombs into the cages, not so much.
I actually like the hot mess with the boots slip and slide stuff.
I do too, yeah.
I think that's a cool mechanic. I think the last phase is cool. Like, it's literally just the goon cage that I think sucks.
I think there's 2 types of mechanics that Blizzard needs to avoid. MC mechanics always suck. Side note, did you hear that Rick Reverb's MC mechanic is DCing people?
Really?
Oh, no.
Yeah, so if you get MC, there's a chance you just get DC'd. It's very funny. And secondly, line of sight mechanics. I think everybody hates those. Unless it's like hide for 2 seconds just to, like, you know, like the jailer hide, where it's like, you know, I cast this big thing, you just need to line of sight for 2 seconds. I think that's okay. But like extended line of sight, I don't think anybody likes that.
Saw this tweet from Nerf. I'm interested in what you guys think. It says Gallywix being easier than Muggsy and Styx aside. Like, you know, obviously everybody wants like a more normalized raid difficulty curve. I hope 50 to 100 pull bosses are the norm moving forward. No more 200 to 300 pull bosses. A good boss being quote unquote undertuned for the best players doing 20 splits is honestly good for the rest of the Mythic rating player base.
Completely agree.
Huge dub.
Yep. I would much rather do 100 bosses or 100 pulls for the entire raid for every boss than Ansarek ever again.
Yeah, it's funny. Dorky was actually, I don't remember if it was or where this popped up, but he literally said that word for word or whatever. And some people had arguments that like it would be a little bit draining and boring that like every boss sort of feels the same. But like if there was a world hypothetically where like okay, maybe not 8 bosses, but let's say like the first 4 bosses of a raid are easy. The next 4 bosses are all like 100 pulls, right? To me, that's like kind of a banger, right? Like that's a way better world than like, at least to me, the difficulty being crazy of like some of them being 300 or 400. It's hard because like, I don't know. Here's the thing is I respect people that want to do crazy shit. Like I think the idea of having really, really crazy hard bosses in the game where they take 400 pulls and the craziest players and like really big commitment. I think that's cool. I just don't really like how like gating really good items for other pieces of content behind that. You know what I mean? Like to me that's the problem, right? Because I've been seeing a lot of comments over the last couple of podcasts and like other sources of people like when everyone was saying the raid is too hard and it's coming from a bunch of people who don't raid and they're saying, well, crybabies, you know, when it's too hard, well, don't do it. It's like, well, we're doing it because we want to do other stuff, right? Like we're getting this gear, or because we like, you know, we're raiding and we're in a raiding guild and we can't just decide to quit after 6 bosses. Like that's the reason we're doing it, right? We're not necessarily saying that, oh, I'm raiding, but I don't want to do it, or yeah, I don't know what exactly they think, but I don't know. It's just like one of those things where I wish they could have some sort of like, dude, if they had a prestige boss at the end of every tier where it's like gave nothing other than an achievement and it was like a 500 pull boss that was like crazy, that'd be fine. I wouldn't care. I would just never do it, you know. But the fact that like, you know, Jaster diamond and mythic tier tokens and all these crazy rare items that I need for, you know, making my guy stronger is coming from these bosses is like frustrating when the boss is like crazy, crazy, crazy hard. Like I don't mind. Like I feel like I've already done so much, right? Like I've committed my time to a guild. I did all this prep. I farmed all the dungeons. I got prebis. I did all the raid. I showed up week after week after week. And it's like, you know, to have a boss to then gate gear behind a boss that takes 300 pulls, which is realistically like weeks of progress for a lot of guilds, is just like I think way too much.
Yeah, I mean, I do understand where you're coming from. At the same point, like selfishly, some of the most fun that I've had, like it's unmatched adrenaline whenever you're at like the end of like a 250 pull boss, right? And you're like, oh, holy shit, this is it. This is the culmination of my months of work. I'm here.
I think. Well, I want to say
before the squishy comes in with a raider take to agree with you, I want to say that there's a fine line between this is it, I'm so happy that we're gonna kill this boss, and I'm finally happy to be free and never fight this boss again. Like I think that's a fine line of like, you know, is that like, are you really happy or are you just like prisoner at that point? Like, you know, oh, you know, I really love jail. Jail is so sick because at the end of your jail sentence, you just open the cage and you're free and it feels so good. It's like, oh, don't, you know, I don't know if that's worth it.
I think there's a little nuance too as to the type of fights there are. Like, Ansarek was 300 to 400 pulls of pain, where like somebody trips on a web blade, you die. Somebody misses a portal, you die. Like, if somebody blows up a seed on Farak, you die. Like, there's a level of or Halandris, for example, right?
Oh
like,
my god, that fight sucks.
There's a level of acceptability in what is fun. But if there is more of like a scripted dance encounter, which isn't everybody's forte, for example, but like as an example, where it feels like you're making progression slowly, like Sprocket Mugger Lock and Stock is going to be a fight like that. Probably 150 pulls for most guilds now, of where you're going through the motions, slowly progressing over time. Oh, at this point, you know, we rotate around, we get knocked back, we pop these. Like, that is like a way more fun boss. And if it was extended to 200 pulls, there'd be some frustration, but I don't think it'd be as bad as a 200 pull Halandris, where half of them you're wiping on the first minute. So, like, there's some nuance there that I think needs to be ironed out as well. I don't think it's an exactly fair question.
Yeah.
But I like the difficulty spread out more. But I do think the end boss could have, you know, slightly more, and, you know, the 5th boss could have slightly less, kind of thing.
I think that's totally reasonable. I think that, like, if it was like 200 cap, like that was the max, 200 pulls max, yeah. I think that's like more reasonable. Like some of my favorite fights, like of all time, like Argus, I thought was a banger. I don't think that one was like,
yeah.
Like, I don't even think that fight was like more than 200 some odd pulls. I thought that I really liked Sire Denathrius. I thought that that was one of my favorite fights of all time. I was I was yelling my head off when we killed Sire. Like, that was a sick boss. Like, okay, yeah, no complaints for me.
I mean, shout out the hippo scream on Sylvanas.
That
Like-
I did like that fight. That fight sucked, but like,
But that's what you're saying, though, right? Like,
Yeah.
you overcome that adverse. Like, in order to feel accomplishment, there does need to be some level of challenge. So as long as there's some level of fun challenge, I don't really have an issue.
yeah, I mean, Jailer was one of the harder bosses I've ever killed, and after that fight, I just felt numb. Like, I was like, I feel nothing. Same with
Yeah.
Sark, I felt the exact same thing. I killed Sark, and I was like, I feel nothing. This is terrible. I felt
I'm fine.
exactly
I'm-
like THD in that clip, where I'm just like, what the hell?
I'm fine with this, though, for what it's worth. Like, I
Yeah.
think 100... If Styx was easier, I hope they, like, now the race is over, they nerf Styx. I hope they nerf Sprocket very slightly. I think they have an easier tier in their hands, but that's not necessarily bad by any.
They shouldn't go buff Gallywix. I think if I'm making them fix one fight or nerf one fight, it's Muggsy 100 times out of 100.
Yeah.
Like, I
It's good for Growl's guild.
yeah, trying to save Drogo's guild.
Yeah, it's hard for me to say buff Gallywix and nerf those other fights just because I don't know about Gallywix, but I think that a lot of the changes they've done so far to like the middling bosses seem fair. Like, I feel like with the gear improvements, because keep in mind, it looked like those two bosses, the 4th and 5th bosses, were really, really hard, but this is with week 1 gear that those guilds were fighting in,
Yeah.
Like, most guilds are going to have week 3, week 4 gear. And I think those bosses get quite a bit easier with gear. So I think that, like,
Yeah, that's
the nerfs that are in place are already good. And I don't know quite about Muggsy and Gallywix yet, but I feel like the difficulty curve of this raid is not so bad for anybody who isn't in a top 20 guild or whatever.
Okay, what do you think about class balance, particularly aimed towards raid? Because I think that Mythic Plus class balance is like way different than raid. I think that there are a lot of. I think that class balance in Mythic Plus is way better than it normally is. So, let's not fuck with that.
I agree.
DK's raid buff is worth 0% this tier.
Well,
Yeah.
hold on. People ran 3 DKs on Styx.
Oh,
And then they
true.
found out there was a hardened rage at 6 minutes and 30 seconds.
Well, that's just because DKs do no fucking damage.
Yeah, but I mean, I think was it an Atlas tweet? I saw it quickly.
Max and Atlas both had similar tweets where they're like, I've never felt more useless. Blizzard has stated multiple times that my raid buff is my grip yet. There's no grip fights. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. Who tweeted us like, it's so nice of Blizzard to spawn every ad in perfect cleave range or something?
On Gallywix, yeah, that was Atlas. Atlas is like, yeah.
Okay.
It's so nice of Blizzard to spawn all the ads stacked. Like,
Yeah, from a healer perspective, I think for the Racer World first, we're seeing fights needing to be 3 healed, people bringing double Mistweaver, balance being not great. I expect that probably will get nerfed. I think we'll see guilds 4 heal a lot of the fights that were 3 healed, and potentially 5 heal some of the fights that were 4 healed, just because those DPS checks are going to get easier, and I think that that's going to free up what healers you can and can't bring. So again, I think Race World first balance healer wise not good, but for most guilds I don't think it's going to be that big of a deal. However, a lot of people, I don't want to say people are meta slaves or copycats. Like, they just want to play what's good for their guild. Like, I do think we're going to see tons and tons of people playing Dispriest and Mistweaver across, like, many of the Hall of Fame guilds and cutting-edge guilds.
I do worry about, say you don't have Ryson or Nick or, Siri or whoever on your Thanner on your healing roster, and instead you have like some normal ass healers. Like, what are you gonna do on Muggsy? Like what?
Yeah,
what are
I guess
we
again, I don't know
doing?
Muggsy, but I do think that there's a lot of healers that are pretty good right now that didn't get a lot of attention. Like, if you're looking at a lot of the top quote unquote like parses or whatever on Warcraft logs, it's actually a ton of Resto Druids and Resto Shamans from what I've seen, just because like Druid actually benefits a lot from the tier set, and they do like a crap ton of healing. I think Holy Priest and Prez aren't necessarily like the highest healers, but they're very, very straightforward. They have very, very on-demand healing, and they're very simple. So I think like, for someone who isn't a like super Omega player, I think that you can do very well with those healers. And Holy Paladin exists.
I mean, wasn't the reason that this Mistweaver was mostly brought was just because it does insane damage right now?
Right, yeah, like it has a lot of good cooldowns. It's doing like, competitive healing, and then it just does a lot of single target damage. It's sort of like this tier of healer reminds me a lot of BFA, where you saw a lot of disc priests and a lot of holy paladin, like strictly because they did good healing and had DR like all the other healers, but then they just did consistent damage. Whereas like if you brought, any other healer, they would just do like Z DPS if they wanted to do that amount of healing.
Yeah. I think
Other
it's
than
kind
that,
of
though,
yeah. Okay, sorry. What were you say?
this spread cleave was going to be real, but I was going to move on. So,
Yeah.
is there anything else?
I mean, I think it's we're kind of in a situation where there's a lot of niches that specializations have to follow, and it's like I wrote some out. Moonkins is priest for spread cleave. Warriors, you really want them for execute. No spec in the game can really touch warriors and execute.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was a triple DK fight, potentially double DK fight on sticks with the bomb spawns, and then obviously mages, warlocks, and monks for Mugsy with the movement requirement. Kind of weird, the class balance this tier for raid.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird, but they like, I think Max was talking about it. They really, really pushed class niches this time around, right? Like, while DK suffered because of the lack of grips, but because there was a lack of grips, spread cleave really shined this time around.
Yeah,
Right? Like, it's almost as if for Boomkin, Warlocks, Priest, and spread cleave to succeed, ads have to not be grippable, which puts DKs in the dirt. But whenever you can grip something, then the melee cleave classes are really good, and your Boomkin is really sad.
dude. There's nothing.
So
there's nothing that's been more sad than Fire Rack ads spawning 60 yards apart, and you just grip them all in, and then I can't DPS them.
and like exactly, like if Farak was realistically like those ads were not movable, instead of bringing double blood DK or something silly like that, you would instead probably brought 2-3 Moonkins instead. So like,
yeah,
if Moonkin and those spread cleave classes are completely the opposite of DK, and the raid for the first time in a while didn't allow you to grip much, which is kind of an interesting thought.
Yeah,
Is
it's
it
a choice
bad?
that Blizzard has definitely made about, they could make all the classes the same or do everything perfectly balanced, but they want that, right? They want that texture of, oh, I play Boomkin and this tier looks crazy because it's, this, or oh, this tier looks insane for execute and I play warrior, and I think that they, for better or for worse, I think that's just how they design, and they want to design, and they're going to keep designing about like, having different specs shine in different times. And unfortunately, that's the blessing and the curse that WoW has, is you have so many different specs, and it's very easy to find a spec that you vibe with and that you really enjoy, like what it does and how it plays and the theme. But at the same time, like, because there's so many specs, that one spec that you enjoy won't always be the specialty of the raid, or even like feel like you're contributing that much. And I think that like if you play WoW, you have to make that decision about being, do I want to be the one spec guy that always plays this and just sort of suck it up when my spec isn't that good, or do I want to like re-roll and try different stuff? But at the same time, it's like whatever, you can't do that. Like you can re-roll every tier and be the special guy or the good class. It's not, some people look down on that, but I think it's, your prerogative. It's a little bit selfish, I think, for people to say, oh, I want to play this one spec all the time, but I always want this spec to be good and get invited over every other spec when there's so many others in the game.
I saw some people complaining about the game right now, but I feel like the game has actually been a pretty good state. I'm pretty happy with what's going on. I've been enjoying it a lot.
I will say class balance I actually think is pretty good. What
Okay.
I will say is not very good is trinket balance and tier set balance.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a problem right now. Dev Evoker tier not being an upgrade from 4 set to 4 set, and then you have Fire Mage at 300k DPS. What happened there?
Well, they just need power infusion. It's not just the 4 set, it's both power infusion and the 4 set, of course.
Yeah, so like, I don't think people are gonna obviously go to the race world first. They're always gonna class stack if they're able to, just to match the needs of their fight. Like, if for example you suddenly needed grips on Gallywix because the ads actually spawned spread apart and didn't move,
yeah,
you were going to then bring in some DKs to compensate. Instead of having the stack cleave. If for some reason they were, bombshell crabs on Gallywix, you would have brought in more mood kids. Like, that's just how the fight works.
What a good mechanic, by the way. I as a Moonkin player think that mechanic is dog shit. For what it's worth, I think that mechanic is really bad.
My favorite part about Styx, I think right now, is the Moon Kids. They pop all the bombshells off and all the hyenas, so they have threat on all of them. And your tanks, none of them have any spread cleave AoE threat whatsoever. So they just run in and beat your Moonkin down. And like the strategy is literally to Ring of Peace your Moonkin, and all your Moonkins stand in the middle of them and hope your tanks have aggro before the Ring of Peace runs out.
That is elite, dude. There were so many healers from the Race World First Guilds that they're all this Resto Druid. They've never played Balance their entire life. They log on, they go, "How do I play this shit?" And then somebody explains it to them, and they immediately go, "Oh, this thing is piss easy."
I will say the Styx clips though from Boomkins have been very funny.
Dude, some people who don't play Balance are doing some egregious stuff lately. I've seen.
It's good though. Growl, are you guys on Styx yet?
Nope. I think we start that next week. We're
Okay.
finishing Rick Reverb today, and then I don't know the plan. It's sort of like we do like an optional raid night as like the last raid, so that's kind of like we're just finishing a Rick Reverb and then probably calling it early or doing like other random stuff or like alt stuff.
All right, let's get to the Q&A. But first, what are the cool stuff that we've seen this week? And I'll link this clip of Hopeful, or a GIF of Hopeful.
Oh man, this I haven't wanted to do the secret Patreon bench drama episode until this, but oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, this situation was so good.
What you guys don't know is that we are some of the biggest hate watchers.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, we're all hate watchers on the inside. All right. To give a little bit of context, I'll let you guys like dig in the VOD if you want to find it. But and this is like not necessarily throwing shade at everyone's, I think, or anyone, because I think everyone sort of has their own point of view here. But basically, Gingy and Hopeful were the two mages in for Echo for Muggsy, and someone made a comment about Gingy's build and trying to get more damage in and like trying to kill the ads faster, and then Gingy was like kind of defending his own build, and then someone just rips you're getting bodied by Hopeful, basically like Hopeful is beating you in every pull, and so Gingy just immediately snaps back with the like, yeah, and he's procking caught and like feeding every pull, and Hopeful just like rolls his eyes and it's just like, bro, are you like what? And it was a pretty funny conversation. And I love those guys because they're so competitive and they're so like, you know, down to the point and honest. And it's like that's more of an EU thing to be like that. I don't know if you'd see that from Liquid, but it was so funny. One of multiple legendary gifs and memes that came out of this tier.
Message Growl if you want an official tea time with the bench.
True.
All right. So some people I've actually seen have performance issues in Raid, and I actually saw this on X, the Everything app. And
I hate that you're calling it, by the way. Stop stealing that from Genos. Stop it.
Blizzard has the CPU profiling. If you hit like the escape and you click on the add-ons tab, you'll actually see that there's like CPU profiling. But apparently it can tank your FPS if you're not careful, depending on like what your situation is. I haven't experienced this, but I do know people at the Race World First that had this problem. And then by turning it off with this in-game command where you can run the CVAR, and you can basically increase your FPS by a little bit. Cool.
It works for some people, it doesn't for others. So
I didn't have any issues, and then I did it, and it didn't change anything. But ultimately, it just turns off the CPU profiling, so doesn't really change too much. And then Squishy got another GIF on Twitter.com from Jet.
Yes. I saw this earlier. People are looking for MC tech, and there's the demolitionists in Floodgate. You know, they cast the big circles, and then you can stop their reload. But if you mind control it, it pulls the entire dungeon.
It did a lot of damage.
Yeah, but it pulled the entire dungeon.
I mean, was that 102 million? Hold on. Let's relax for a second. If it does enough damage, I'll consider. Maybe.
Seems good.
Yeah. All right.
I'll throw one in, something that I haven't mentioned before, but this is something that I use. A lot of people are, let's say you're an M+ gamer, you're trying to improve your raid, but you don't really want to work that hard. A really useful website is lorgs.io, lorrgs.io. I don't know if DPS or tanks really use this, but I find it very, very, very helpful for healers. Basically, it takes the top 50 logs for every spec, so you can basically just go in the top right and pick like whatever healer, whatever mythic, whatever boss, and then like so. For instance, Tettles pulled it up on screen here. You can see like literally every single disc priest in the entire world is ramping the intermission of Cauldron. And so like if you're going into a fight and you don't want to spend, a bunch of time VOD reviewing, you can literally pull this site up as your team is going to the boss, and you can be like, okay, well, now I know exactly where all of my big ramps should be or where all the big damage is. And you can even click on the left side if you click like the number, and it brings up a thing where you can copy paste their like all the timers and put it in the ERT note. You can just click on the name or anything like as part of that.
Right here.
There you go. So like you can literally just type in your name of your character there, and then it formats an entire ERT note for the reminders week or a thing, and then you just slam that into your note, and then it's like bam. So generally you want like as few as possible things in there. So like for Disc Priest, I'll only do the big ramps, or like for Druid, like maybe I'll only do flourishes and tranks or whatever.
So
but if you want to sort of like start getting to the point where you're prepping for raid and like not totally trolling when you walk into a boss, this is like a very, very useful site for healers, I think.
So you would do something like this where you're actually taking off everything that's not the
exactly.
Void Fiend.
Like I would literally just do this. Because you can do two things, right? Like you can see most people are running Evenge and not Shadow or not Mindbender. There's a couple guys running Mindbender, like the weird ones. And then I would just look and see, I would sort of see where a majority of people are using those cooldowns. Like not all fights will be this clean, but like this fight, like you can literally know nothing about anything that happens in this fight. Look at this for 12 seconds and know exactly when you need to do every single big ramp, right? And then like, you might be able, you could look at like barrier or whatever CDs, but I find it like very, very useful for healers. For DPS, the problem is just like generally it just use all your cooldowns as many times as possible in the fight, whereas it's not necessarily the same as healers. Like healers, it's more about like where you get the most amount of throughput for each cooldown.
I think for DPS it depends on the fight. I know for Queen Ansurek from a DPS perspective, it was an excellent tool because fight times were just like what you were pressing your cooldowns on was pretty variable at times. And for Moonkins, more often than not, they ended up pressing, their CDs on the second platform in the intermission with their Spymaster's Web and stuff like that. But it didn't come up at that time, but you wouldn't know that unless you were using like Lorgs or something like that, or somebody told you that you should delay 20 or 30 seconds. But for DPS, it does kind of depend. Generally, like you said, yeah, you should just be pressing your CDs on CD. But it is still a pretty good tool for DPS. I don't think it's ever a bad thing to just get a sanity check on when you're pressing your offensive buttons.
Yep.
I think for like Six Bunk Junker for Balance Druid, I think it would probably be pretty good just to kind of, are people waiting for the first the first set of ads to come out, or are they actually just jamming it on pull? Like what, or are they double pressing their CAs, stuff like that? I think it's
well, like that's a good example too, right? The one you pulled up is like, are you waiting for the first ads or are you jamming it on pull? Like for here, I would look at this and think, well, it doesn't matter, right? Like whatever I want to do, like both of the options seem viable here. So like if your raid leader says, hey, can you hold it for the first ads? And you're like, no, I'm trolling, blah, blah, blah. You can pull this up and be like, nah, actually there's tons of good parsers that do this. Likewise reverse too, where it's like, if he's mad that you're popping CDs and blasting the ads and wants you to hit the boss, you can use this and be like, well, actually I can still do really good damage if I'm just popping it on pull.
It's also a little bit of nuance there, because like, do you need more ad damage? Are you triple boomkin? Maybe you can just send one boomkin to the boss and the other two on the ads.
Right, absolutely. It doesn't tell you the whole story, but it's just a good starting point for if you're trying to learn, especially like, if you're somebody who is like, oh dang, there's infinite tier and raid trinkets and I need to start raiding, like let me go into heroic and try and get some good parses so I can find a guild. Like this is the perfect, just like, where are all the cooldowns going? How do I need to, if you don't know anything about the fights?
Yep.
Great website. That's a great tip for the viewers, actually. Insane.
A rare Growl rating tip.
All right. For Q&A, if you want Q&A answered on the show, you can either DM me on Discord or you can tweet or DM at the bench wow on twitter.com, and we're gonna just take your Q&A week in and week out. This week we only have one question. It's from Dark Rababa, and I think this was skipped last week because we ran out of time. I think we were running low on hard drive space or something like that. And he said, I heard you guys talking about Dinars 2 weeks ago. What about instead of releasing them attached to a quest, you release them attached to completing activities in a Blackrock Depths-esque raid? Then you're going to be able to buy loot from the current season, Mythic Plus, or raid, not just attached to the raid. And this will hopefully increase participation in the 11.1.5 content and add rewards that were needed for 11.0.5.
I'm in.
Basically, we were talking about the BRD raid not being good enough incentive wise, and then he's like, "Well, everybody wants a dinar. Why not throw a dinar there?"
Yeah.
I think the biggest concern with this is alts. If alts are chill, and then like once I do it once, I can just get all my dinars on all my characters. I'm not necessarily against that. If I had to do like this is like I guess you have to think about how long it's gonna take. Like completing a BRD raid, especially for a normal person who doesn't have a guild, might be a big ask. Maybe like on the easiest difficulty if you still give one. I don't know. I don't hate the idea. Like I think giving dinars in a 0.5 patch is like exactly where they should be. I think this is a season where dinars are needed badly, and there's so many trinkets. Like one of the big problems is when you have a trinket that's good for 18 of the 20 classes in your raid, and you're just like, I'm a healer. Like, dude, I hear so many people complaining about not getting loot, and I'm just like, I'm not even in the realm of being able to get loot. Like, I need all of you guys complaining about loot to get loot before I can even think about getting any of these trinkets. And it's just like, yeah. So having dinars in a 0.5 patch is good. I think that giving them as a reward for doing the content, I think could be cool, especially if they do that regularly. You know, if every single 0.5 patch has something cool and a dinar linked to it, I think that could be a cool feedback loop. I just worry that not every 0.5 patch has something as cool as a new BRD raid, right? Like, what if it ends up being some annoying, go to this island and do this quest chain that takes 2 hours? Like, to me, I would be like, just give me my freaking dinar.
I mean, Horrific Visions is coming out.
Oh, shit. Hold on.
Yeah, see, there you go.
I actually think, like, I was thinking about it, like, Horrific Visions is coming out. If they tied it to, like, you know, a 5-mask run, it'd be a little bit of time gating, but, like, I actually think Horrific Visions were pretty well liked.
Yeah.
And it gives some incentive for people to do that. Like, there's already some incentive for Heroic Visions to get hero gear. It drops hero gear, by the way.
Ooh.
A dinar behind it, I could see that.
Seems actually not bad. Yeah, I think it's I think that BRD was really, really under rewarded, and I hope that Horrific Visions also aren't under rewarded. I think that a dinar would be fine. Like, I think it's totally fine. It makes sense too from a reward structure perspective.
Agreed.
Dude, I'm gonna have to make a really tough choice as to what I'm buying with the dinar. Because there's
surely you'll get important good items out of your vaults before then, right? Like, surely you'll get a couple of those.
Okay, I'm not raiding is the problem, right? And there's 3.
Surely you won't.
There's 3 real items that I want from the raid, and it's House of Cards, Best in Slots, Jaster Diamond.
Oh boy.
So I think that I'm not gonna take the House of Cards. What are we boying? Is there class tuning?
So breaking news, they just nerfed Mythic Sticks as of right now.
Again?
I can't figure out all of it, but they made the recycler cast longer.
Oh, nice.
So you know the you know the thing where it like locks on, you have to kill it, or else it kills the person. They just made that longer.
That's good.
They nerfed the infected bite from the hyenas because those were mauling poor boomkins.
Poor boomkins, we were talking about that. Yeah.
They buffed the damage with the recycler to make sure it's an insta kill now if you fail it, because we were living it before.
Yeah, Windwalker monks could press every button and live it. Yeah.
What is it? 14 seconds up from 10.
Oh, that's nice. I think that should have been most of the difficulty of the fight, honestly, was the Scrapmaster's Recycle.
I agree. There's a lot of other stuff, but let's see here. There's a lot. I see a beelit change. I don't know what that is.
Oh no, my tip from last week.
Oh, the mind control the beelit.
You can mind control the beelit, and it did big damage.
I can't tell you what the beelit change is, but it's there.
Probably my tip from last week.
They did something with Bonk, the stun and Dark Flame Cleft.
Oh, the one from the mobs that are after the first boss, right?
Yeah, okay. I don't know what they did, but they did something to that. So yeah, there you go. If Sticks got nerfed, that's good change. It needed it.
All right, you guys have a
Um,
new patch to look forward to that you already read probably before you watch this.
Yep.
Who
All
knows?
right.
There might be more.
That's it. That's it for us. So, congratulations to all those who listened to the bench episode 38.
Thank you for making it to the end. We appreciate you.
Why did I say
Hell yeah.
38? It's 34. I just added numbers.
I was like, I'm pretty sure it was 33 last week.
That's definitely not right. Yep. I just realized.
Tettles, two thumbs up again.
All right. GG's.
Bye bye.
GG's.